Can you imagine living among tombstones and mausoleums, watching your favorite series lying on a tomb? What about children running and playing among bags of unearthed bones? It sounds like something out of a movie, but this is the daily reality of thousands of people who call Manila North Cemetery home. But what makes so many people choose a cemetery as their home? What are the challenges and peculiarities of living in a place destined for eternal rest? How did a place made for the dead become a shelter for the living? These questions will be answered now. Today, Bello Mundo takes you to unveil the shocking reality of Manila's North Cemetery. Get ready to discover a place that goes far beyond your imagination. But first, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and activate the notifications. It costs nothing, and this way you support the channel to keep bringing you incredible content. To understand the history of Manila North Cemetery and how it became home to thousands of people, it's first important to get to know the city that is home to this contradictory setting. If you dream of going to the Philippines as your dream destination, you may need to think twice about considering Manila as part of that itinerary. While the archipelago is famous for its paradisiacal beaches, such as Boracay, with its white sand and crystal-clear waters, Palawan, known for its secret lagoons and imposing rock formations, and Siargao, a surfer's paradise, the capital Manila offers a stark contrast. With almost 13 million inhabitants, it is an urban giant. So many people, so much concrete and chaos that, for many, the first impression is overwhelming. And so, in the midst of this scenario of inequality and disorder, a unique community was born, where the living and the dead share the same space. Manila North Cemetery came into being during a period of great change in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the Philippines was undergoing significant transformations. After more than 300 years as a Spanish colony, the country was annexed by the United States after the Spanish-American War. At first, the American occupation brought improvements. Manila began to modernize, and this was reflected in the urban infrastructure. And in this context of infrastructure, the city faced a serious problem: overcrowding in the cemeteries. Traditional sites like Paco Cemetery no longer had room for new graves. And as the city expanded, the demand for new burial places became urgent. It was then, in 1904, that the American government decided to found the Manila North Cemetery, located in Santa Cruz, north of Manila. The cemetery was planned to be spacious, capable of accommodating a large number of tombs and mausoleums, as well as allowing better organization for future burials. Over the years, it has become a space of national memory, where the stories of several generations are inscribed on tombstones and monuments, mainly due to the passage of the Second World War. That's right. If on the one hand the American occupation was good, on the other hand, it only brought destruction when the Japanese arrived on the island. The Japanese occupation of the Philippines began a few hours after the famous attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. During the occupation, the country suffered until 1945, when the city of Manila was brutally bombed. More than 100,000 civilians died in the so-called Liberation of Manila, a battle marked both by American bombing and by the desperate orders of Japanese soldiers to kill as many Filipinos as they could. Few people know it, but Manila was the scene of some of the most brutal battles of the Second World War. Powerful evidence of this period is the Manila American Cemetery, an immense necropolis dedicated to American soldiers killed in the Pacific. More than 17,000 soldiers who fought in the United States Armed Forces during the war are buried there, in a vast green esplanade of 62 hectares, dotted with white marble tombs. This cemetery is beautiful and extremely well kept, similar to the memorials on American soil. There is an imposing circular building where the names of another 36,000 soldiers missing in action from the battles in the South Pacific are engraved. All around, the graves are arranged with millimetric precision, forming perfect circles in an impeccable lawn maintained by more than 30 gardeners. But returning to our cemetery, Manila North Cemetery, the reality is quite different. Here, there are no gardeners or precisely sculpted sculptures. Initially, Manila North Cemetery was designed as an eternal resting place for Manila's wealthiest families, including presidential figures such as former presidents Manuel Quezon, Sergio Osmeña, and Ramon Magsaysay, and actor Fernando Poe Jr., a legend of Philippine cinema. Over the years, the cemetery established itself as a symbol of wealth and social status, with luxurious mausoleums and elaborate tombstones that reflected the power of the elites of the time. However, this reality began to change drastically in the 20th century. Manila's uncontrolled urbanization, rapid population growth, and lack of adequate housing policies led to an unprecedented housing crisis. During the 1960s, with the city overcrowded and the cost of living skyrocketing, slum areas began to grow, and many people with no options were forced to seek shelter in unusual places, and Manila North Cemetery became one of these unexpected refugees. Today, the cemetery extends over more than 500,000 square meters and is home to around 6,000 people spread over approximately 800 families. These people live among the tombs and mausoleums, turning the cemetery into an unlikely home. For anyone passing by, what they see seems impossible to imagine, a scene that completely defies the traditional view of a cemetery as a place of silence and respect. At Manila North Cemetery, life pulses differently, mixing with death in a surreal way. Walking through the cemetery, visitors come across scenes that, at first glance, may seem strange. Families literally live on top of the graves, improvising houses with materials they find along the way. Women lay out their clean clothes on clotheslines set up between the tombstones. Children run and play among the tombs, climbing tombstones as if they were playgrounds, while teenagers play basketball with baskets hanging from the mausoleum walls. For many of these children, the cemetery is the only home they know, and living surrounded by the dead doesn't scare them. It's part of their everyday reality. Meanwhile, the adults go about their routines as best they can. They play cards, watch soap operas on old televisions, and do whatever is necessary to pass the time and get on with life. The houses inside the cemetery vary according to the resources each family has managed to gather. Some houses are made of wood with metal roofs, resembling typical slum shacks, while others are even more improvised with tarpaulins stretched over blocks of tombs. There are also those families who live in more protected mausoleums, which look like small houses, equipped with railings and even basic furniture. Life in the cemetery has also generated an economy of its own, where residents have adapted and created means of support. Many of the residents were born and raised in this environment, and over the years have started small businesses, selling goods or offering services related to the graves. Some work as janitors, paid by families to keep the tombs clean and well cared for. Others, even without formal agreements, do the same work in the hope of receiving some compensation. Stonemasons build tombs, and some make candles from recycled wax to sell to visitors. The number of funerals per day, which is around 80, keeps many of these workers busy, especially those who engrave the names on the headstones. The density of graves in the cemetery is so high that, in many areas, hearses can't even get through. As a result, relatives have to carry the coffins on their shoulders, navigating between the graves and past the residents' makeshift houses. The cemetery, in many ways, functions like a small town, with stores, stalls offering Wi-Fi, karaoke, video games, ice cream vendors, and even basketball courts. The difference is that everything happens in the cemetery. Living in Manila's North Cemetery is not just a matter of adapting to homelessness. The families who live there face daily challenges that go far beyond material difficulties. One of the biggest problems is the lack of basic infrastructure. Water, for example, is a scarce commodity. Residents often have to carry it from distant wells, and sanitation is practically non-existent. Most makeshift dwellings don't have access to proper toilets, and residents rely on makeshift latrines or use areas near graves for their daily needs. This situation exacerbates the spread of disease, especially among children, who are the most vulnerable to unsanitary conditions. Without adequate access to medical care, common illnesses such as respiratory and gastrointestinal infections can become serious, putting the lives of many at risk. Electricity is also a rare luxury that few can afford. Many families make botched job, connecting clandestine wires to the city's electricity grid. The result? Frequent blackouts and a constant risk of fires. And during the summer, when the heat is unbearable, things get even worse. Without ventilation or power, residents seek any shade they can get, throwing themselves on the cold stones of graves to try to cool off. And as if the problems with the heat and lack of electricity weren't enough, violence is another issue that affects life in this community. The cemetery, which used to be considered a peaceful refuge, has become the target of police operations, especially after the destruction of a nearby favela. Drug use increased, and along with it, violence inside the cemetery. In 2016, the war on drugs, initiated by President Rodrigo Duterte, brought fear to the graves. More than 12,000 people lost their lives during the operations in the country, and the cemetery became a target because it was seen as a hideout for drug traffickers. Now, residents who used to sleep with a sense of security have started locking the gates of their mausoleums. Police presence and extrajudicial executions became part of everyday life. Over time, these operations have diminished, but fear still surrounds the community. Many drug users gave themselves up to avoid death, and today violence is less visible, but never completely absent. Despite all this, the residents resist. For many, living in the cemetery is safer than facing the reality of Manila's slums, where violence is even more brutal and evictions are a constant threat. The cemetery, strange as it may seem, offers a sense of stability. And as many say, the dead can't hurt anyone. Overcrowding is another factor that challenges life in the cemetery. Remember how we talked about how busy cemeteries are? While on the one hand this is good and boosts local commerce, on the other it brings even more challenges for the living. With more than 80 burials a day, the space can no longer hold so many dead. After 5 years of rent, if the relatives of the deceased don't pay, the remains are exhumed and the graves reused. It's not uncommon to find bags of bones and clothes scattered around, a disturbing scene that reveals how much the space is fought over by both the dead and the living. But in the face of so many challenges, what is impressive is the resilience of this community. Not only did they survive, they adapted to the circumstances. They have created their own networks of support and solidarity, ensuring that everyone has at least the basics. In 1996, for example, they appealed to the government for a school, toilets, and a church inside the cemetery. When they didn't get any help, they took matters into their own hands. The community began to organize classes for the children, offering an opportunity for education, even with extremely limited resources. The children, who often start work very early to help their families, still have a chance to learn and dream of a better future, even if they know that the chances of change are slim. But unfortunately, government comes and goes, and the scenario remains the same. In 2019, there were reports that Manila City Hall removed some houses to make room for family members visiting the cemetery. Even so, many of the residents are still there, making up one of the most striking landscapes in the whole of Asia. And so, among the tombs and mausoleums of Manila's North Cemetery, life goes on, marked by struggles, challenges, but also hope and determination. Want to know more about stories like this? Then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the content. And now we want to hear from you. What did you think of life in the Manila Cemetery? Do you know of any other places as unusual as this one? Share your ideas with us and keep exploring with us the most surprising and unknown realities of this bello mundo, which is sometimes not so beautiful. Thank you very much for watching and see you on your next adventure.